Okay, so today we're going to continue looking at economic inequality and how unfair world trade is. So when I talk about world trade, I'm talking about all of us countries exporting goods to each other. Like when we Irish people export our goods that we make here, like our cattle and our butter and our clothes, we expect that we get a fair price for it. And that doesn't happen all across the world, and there's dreadful unfair trading happening. So we're going to look at the coffee trade because this is one of the worst I suppose, like examples of how people are treated unfairly. So I suppose if you look at the top 10 coffee producing countries, you've got Mexico, Guatemala, the Ivory Coast, Ethiopia, India, Vietnam, Indonesia, Uganda, Brazil, okay, Colombia. You've all of these coffee producing countries, and the problem is you've too many coffee producing countries producing too much coffee. We all don't need it. There's a surplus supply of it. What happens? The price goes down. Okay? Now, they're lucky that they can grow coffee. Coffee only grows in specific climates. You can't have any frost, and the temperatures must be above 21 degrees Celsius. Well, that well and truly rules us out anyway in Ireland. So we can't grow the coffee. But we are big coffee drinkers, so we depend on them to produce coffee for us. Lovely. They see that. There's a market for it. Let's produce the coffee and sell it. And we're all hooked on coffee, so they're delighted. They know that they have us. It's a very important export crop for many, many poor countries. They may be poor, but they've got the climate so they can grow the coffee beans and they can export it. Sounds good. Some of this coffee, a lot of this coffee is grown on big farms called plantations. Some coffee is grown on small farms. Think of your regular farmer back the road from you, small farms like that. But a lot of coffee is grown on big, big plantation farms. Often these are owned by big kind of agricultural companies, big business owners, and they employ people to work for them. Okay, so coffee plantations. The coffee bean is grown on these kind of plants or trees, I suppose, and they pick the coffee bean, etc. So the small farmers grow the coffee as a cash crop. So that's another word for it as well. It's an export crop, it's a cash crop, it's money, like it's a crop that makes a good lot of money for you, or it should. What is a cash crop? It's a crop produced for its commercial value rather than for its use. So the farmer isn't really growing the coffee bean for making coffee for himself in the evening time. He's growing the coffee for making money. Okay, and that's fair enough. What do? They grow the coffee beans and they pick them. They lay them out and they leave them dry. Okay, so it's very important that you leave the coffee beans dry. They bag them. They export it as unprocessed coffee beans. They don't make the coffee in the poor countries. They don't have any control over the coffee prices. Okay, they literally grow them and the buyer comes along. Usually the buyer comes from Europe and they buy the unprocessed bag of coffee beans off of them. The price of coffee beans fluctuates from year to year. A decline or a drop in the price of the coffee beans is disastrous for these coffee growers or these farmers and the countries that depend on it. So it's like saying to you, I'm going to employ you. Your wages are going to be 10,000 this year. Next year they'll be 40,000 and the following year they're going to drop to 5,000. You can't plan. You can't support your family. You can't go for a mortgage, buy a car. You can't plan if you don't know what your wages are going to be. So it must be dreadful for these coffee growers because you don't know if you can feed your family because your wages are constantly rising and dropping and rising and dropping. So what's happening? How is all this working? Okay, let's have a look through it. The supply of coffee is greater than the demand. I spoke to you about that earlier. They're producing far more coffee beans than we need. I mean, all you have to do is look in the supermarkets yourself. There's a ridiculous amount of coffee beans in the shelves. Too much. So we've so many coffee producing countries now that we've an excess supply of coffee beans. So what happens? The price goes down. Okay. What are the top 5 coffee export destinations? Well, back in 2009, 2010, you had Germany, you had Saudi Arabia, you had the US, you had Belgium, Italy, typical coffee drinking countries. We in Ireland are catching up on them fairly fast, I would imagine. So why are these developing countries, why are they insisting on producing and growing extra coffee beans when they know we've too many? Well, one reason is because many of these countries have big debts and they want to repay their debts. So if they increase their exports, they're growing more coffee. They're not realizing that the price of it's going down. They're just desperate. Okay, so they're growing more coffee beans to sell more coffee, to make money, to pay their debts. Surplus coffee means the price will drop. Okay, so it's just affecting them in the long run. The second reason is that Vietnam has greatly expanded coffee production. So we've another country that's after coming on board now, producing more coffee beans. So they're flooding the world market with coffee beans. Another huge problem as well is tariff barriers in the north. Now this word tariff here means taxes, okay? A small number of multinational companies dominate the international coffee trade, okay? So they're dominating the price of the coffee, okay? Kraft is one of these multinational companies that dominates the coffee trade, and you can see all of the brands there in front of you, and you should recognize some of the brands that Kraft owns. We're looking at Lunchables, we're looking at Oreos, you might eat them, the Ritz crackers, we're looking at Toblerone, that chocolate if you like it. Is there anything else I recognize there? No, I can't see anything else anyway. So this is a big multinational company, and it also dominates the coffee. It also literally makes coffee as well. They produce Maxwell House coffee, okay, and that's a very popular coffee brand. Nestlé is another multinational company that dominate the coffee trade. So Nestlé and Kraft are big multinational companies that dominate the coffee trade. They make a load of coffee products. These multinational companies have factories, right? But they locate the factories in the developed world, right? So they buy the unprocessed coffee beans over in the poor countries, but they process the coffee beans in the developed world, in the rich countries. Now, you might think that's unusual because mostly don't we really locate our factories in the poorer countries because the labour is cheaper. But these multinational companies seem to want to keep those jobs here in the rich countries and process the coffee here. Maybe it's more logical, maybe they're just closer to their market. So they roast the coffee beans here and sell it here. Then the coffee beans are ground, okay? So they roast the coffee beans. So they arrive, they buy the coffee beans off of the poor countries. They arrive over to us in the rich countries by ship. They bring the unprocessed coffee beans into the factories. They roast them. Don't that nice flavour. They grind them down into that powdery form that we see in the coffee jar. And then they package it and they sell it to the supermarkets, okay? The roasting of the coffee beans in the factory, I just wanted to show you a better picture. They do wash them as well before they roast them. And then they grind them and then they package them. Now, the governments in the rich countries are protecting the multinationals such as Kraft and Nestlé because they're creating jobs by keeping the factories here and processing them here. So the governments in the rich countries are delighted that the multinational companies are staying here and keeping jobs here. So they're looking after them. Now, how are they looking after them? If a developing poor country processes the coffee beans themselves, and if they want to sell it here to us, we slap a tariff barrier on them. So we charge them a tax to sell their coffee here. So let me give you an example. If the poor countries roast and process the coffee beans themselves and make their own jar of coffee, and we'll say they just call it coffee from Brazil or something, Brazilian coffee, right? If they want to sell it here, number one, anyway, we're insulted because we want to process the coffee ourselves to create jobs up here. So what we do is we slap a charge or a tax on that jar of coffee. So for example, firstly, that country, that Brazilian coffee, they only want to sell it for €2. But what we do is we slap a tax or a tariff on top of it. And now it brings the jar of coffee up to $3.50. Now you go into the supermarket up here and you see the Brazilian jar of coffee for $3.50, but you see the Nestlé jar of coffee for €2. Now which one are you going to pick up? You're going to pick up the cheaper one. So by the rich countries slapping a tariff or a tax on the jar of coffee from the poorer countries, it means that less people will be inclined to buy it because it's expensive. So therefore there's no demand for the coffee from the poor countries. So it's just dreadful what we're doing to them. So a tariff barrier is a tax on imported goods which makes them more expensive. We do it on a lot of things, like the example there in front of you is the tea towel made in Britain. It should cost €4. When we export that over to America, they put a 25% tariff on top of it. So that adds €1 to the price. So you're in a shop over in America. Are you going to pick up the tea towel that costs a €5? Are you going to pick up the tea towel American made that costs €3? You know, think logically. Putting these tariffs on goods coming into your country. It only actually protects the country itself, not the person that's trying to sell them to you. That's why Brexit is going to create a whole load of problems, because when they're officially gone, when we export goods over to them, like our cattle and our butter, they're going to slap a tariff and a tax on top of it. So are people over in England going to keep buying our goods if they're going to be more expensive? That's why a lot of people are freaking out about it. How's it going to affect our economy? So that's world trade. It's unfair. Okay, so it's really affected the coffee. If you look at this picture in front of you now, this is a really good one. A regular cup of coffee, the farmer gets 3 cents. For, like, what you pay for a regular cup of coffee, we'll say €2.50. The retailer is making the most of the money out of that. The roaster is making some money. The exporter, the buyer is making some money. The farmer is making the least amount of money. He's getting 3 cents. He's the fella that grew the coffee beans. We wouldn't be able to drink the cup of coffee if he didn't make the coffee beans. Yet he's getting the least amount of money. The retailers are doing nothing. The shop, like Centra and Super Value and Costa Coffee and all of them, Insomnia, those coffees, they're only literally just putting the coffee beans into the machine and it's roasting them up and literally putting it into the cup and selling it to you. So they're doing the least amount of work, earning the most money. The farmers are doing the most amount of work, earning the least money. So it's just cruel how it works out. So the fair trade cup of coffee makes sure that the farmer gets paid his equal amount of money, his fair amount of money that he should have earned. So if you can buy fair trade in future, I suppose it's a good thing to do so. So the countries in the north continue to make most of the profits from the coffee business. They receive most of the money for doing the least amount of work, while the poor developing countries receive the least amount of money for doing the most of the work. So it's just dreadfully poor, or dreadfully unfair. Okay, I hope I've explained that okay. So tomorrow we're going to move on to aid to the south. So these countries are just in dire straits, they're in severe poverty. How do we help them? What money or what